Hi, I'm Dr. Kathy Passion, the host of the podcast Reinventing Retirement. Sometimes I take a break from talking with active seniors who are living their best lives. Did you know that according to Redfin, the majority of Americans 65 and over have lived in their house more than 33 years? I found that incredible. Our homes have become so much more than just a financial asset. It's become part of our story. And today we're talking with an experienced real estate professional about the emotional and mental aspects of having to change home situations later in life. Jim Perry has 7 years of experience in real estate, the last two of which as a licensed realtor. He has owned many properties and has moved 4 times himself as an adult. He has lots of good information from his personal and professional real estate activities. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you. It's so nice to be here.
Thanks. Well, I am so excited. I can't thank you enough for being here. And I'm just going to jump right in because I'm sure people want to hear everything you have to say. So let's talk about the emotional side. Why are housing decisions more often more emotional for people in our retirement years?
So I think when you talk about houses, and you mentioned it, right? If you've lived somewhere for 33 years, that can be the better half of your life. And as someone who's 60, I'm not far, or not 60, but close to being 60. I'm not far away from it. And to me, I think it marks the official close of a chapter. It might be the close of a chapter of raising your kids, or moving away from your friends and downsizing. And when you go through anything like that, emotions come with the conclusion of that chapter. Whether it means leaving friends and neighbors who've been through your through the same journey as you, it might be difficult to disengage and just let go. But here's the point I want to make. Endings are important. So much of what good can come out of your life requires the ending of something. And no matter what, um, as I look out into my potential retirement, I see the opportunity for growth and for personal fulfillment that can come when you let go of things that are just no longer serving what you need.
Absolutely. So, in your experience, what emotions do you see most often when people first start considering a move? Really, at any age, even though we're talking about seniors primarily here.
Yeah, it is more prevalent with people who've lived in a house for a long time. There is an emotional value that comes along with all of the memories that sometimes when we price a house out and we do a comparative evaluation for the house and we say, here's where we think the house is. They look at it and go, this house is worth millions, or it's irreplaceable to me. And the reality is your house is worth as much as someone is willing to pay for it. And while you might, feel like it's worth millions, the market will bear its cost. And, I try and coach people to recognize that you know, this is a transaction. It is a business transaction. You are letting go of one property in anticipation of doing or moving something somewhere else. Your goal is to get as much as you can. Someone else's goal is to get it for as little as they can. And by recognizing that this is a natural process that happens thousands of times a month just in the city of Columbus, you can begin to recognize like there is some give and take that in the long run probably won't be significant in your life.
Absolutely. So, you touched on it, but let's really delve into it. Let's talk about the mental barriers to change. What are some of the biggest mental hurdles that prevent people from making a housing change, even when they know it's the right decision?
Um, we talked about the end of something and then the beginning of something else. And if you're near the end of something, but the beginning of the next thing is unclear, there is a likelihood to want to just hunker down. The problem with that is sometimes that next thing requires you to fully disengage. In other words, to really embrace living in a different state, you have to live there, not dream of living there. To fully embrace moving closer with your family, if they've moved away, you need to get an apartment. You need to begin to take the actions necessary to discover that world of possibility, to create the pull that generates the motivation. So I think that a lot of times that is lacking. The other is fear as an incredible limiting motivating factor. People get stuck in worrying about not getting enough on the next side when they go by. Will they have enough? Um, and and that fear can trap people in their home. When I sense that that is there, but they've engaged me as an agent, I really ask for them to think about like, hey, what is the absolute worst thing that's going to happen here? Like, do you believe you're going to end up homeless? Of course not. Um, you know, do you believe that maybe the timing might be right or wrong? You never know. Like I always say, the time to sell your house is when you've decided. That is it. That is it. And you've contacted me. And so part of you is ready. And you need to sort of work with that. Does that make sense?
It does. So I hear you saying it's good to have something that's pulling you towards something,
Right.
and then you make the decision, and then you kind of have a desire to go to the next step.
Absolutely. Like
And
my wife and I have been talking about moving somewhere downtown. And recently, what we've started thinking about is like, hey, let's get an Airbnb down there. Let's change the dialogue from one of like wonder and, every time we visit, it's like, oh, this would be amazing. But like, what if we rented an Airbnb down there for a week and then we're like, it's less than amazing, Or in that week, it just affirms our belief. All of these are micro steps that help you learn what could be next and what could fit in your life. Even if we did it and it just didn't fit, well, then, okay, that's off the table. Now we expand our search to go, what else might feel good?
that is an incredibly practical tip to go rent something and make sure you like it, because anything can seem great on vacation, but once you're there and you're actually living there. So, how do you help your clients separate the emotional concerns from the practical concerns?
Um, the phrase you just said is actually perfect. Actually sometimes say, like, first of all, you want to acknowledge the emotion. You want to say, I hear your frustration, or I hear your concern, or worry, or anxiety. Tell me about the source of that. Like, what do you think? Is it the fear of loss of money? It is the fear of control of the situation. Like, what is it that is driving that emotion? Because that's what I want to address. Like, that's the thing that actually needs space in the room. And so when I acknowledge it and then ask for the source of it, I can then begin to have a rational conversation about the source while not necessarily, working on the emotion. I've never had a transaction where on the buy or the sell side where there wasn't some emotion. So the other part is to figure out, is that emotion something I as a realtor need to lean into and help them get past, or is it an in the moment thing and it will pass? Does that make sense?
It does.
Often we look at these things and say emotion in business is bad, and I look at it and go, not. I disagree, because it hides passion and it hides real truths. And so to me, it's the outward messenger around how I can navigate to help improve the situation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'd rather have that than a stoic face. I'm like, oh, they want, the bid is 20,000 under your asking price. No.
So, so have you had anyone, I want to say, almost push back? I don't want to talk about the emotional side or anything like that, or do you find people are ready to talk about it? Because I mean, they're thinking about making a move, and especially, I assume, your older clients. Any pushback that you remember, or is it just a matter of getting them to open up? I'm sure just the fact that you ask
I
them.
mean, it's normally front and center. You
Yeah.
know, Particularly
Okay.
there's two phases in which emotions tend to arise in the real estate transaction. The first is the negotiation of the price. So
Mm,
that is there is always going to be emotion in that. And I like to say, before we buy a house or before we sell a house, I like to sort of forewarn, you're likely going to have some emotion through this. I may be like I'm legally obligated to bring any offer. I do not get to hear someone make an offer on a home, and let's say it's a $500,000 home and an offer comes in at $250,000. I don't get to say no. Now, I can tell the person who's making the offer that I don't believe my client will take it, but I'm legally obligated to give it to my client. When I talk to my clients and I say, listen, I'm likely going to come to you, and I don't get to control what the offer is. There's only so much I can do in pushing the levers. At the end of the day, someone has to make a decision. And so, if I happen to bring you news that isn't working for you, I sometimes will say, "This is how I can best arm you with a response." So, if you have an immediate reaction that's really negative, I want you to think about saying, Jim, can you give me a couple of hours and then we'll talk about it? I'm essentially giving them the emotional cues to give back to me to help them find the time and the distance they need to get from the emotional to the okay, because typically your first offer is your best offer.
mm,
It's very rare that that second offer, if you reject the first offer, is better. Now,
mm.
there might be better buyers, but from a dollar perspective, my general coaching is work with your first offer unless it's an absolute absurd lowball. Um, but that doesn't tend to happen in today's market. So that is part of it. The other part is just acknowledging that in our conducting of this, you're going to feel emotional, and I'm going to tell you that's okay. But we have to focus on the outcomes that you desire, which is to sell the house or buy the house. And that gives me permission to redirect them if I think that the emotions are interfering with the direction that they want
Yeah.
to go.
Yeah. Interesting. So especially when we're talking about today's seniors and especially those with family, sometimes, you and your wife are thinking about possibly moving. I'm sure through their whole life, your parents probably made the decision to move. It changes as we age, doesn't it?
It
And
does.
sometimes, does it become more of a larger part of the family kind of decision?
Um, that is so situational. I think it depends on where they want to go and where they are in the stage of life. So sometimes the family gets really involved because instead of moving from the house, they're now in their 80s, 90s, they've stayed in the house for 50 years, and now you're looking at some sort of living care assistance. Um, and in that case, I think the family has to be part of the dialogue to ensure that those seniors have the support and care and land in the very best environment possible. Um, I think when my parents decided to retire in their late 50s, they really didn't engage my sister and I. They said we're moving to Florida, and we went okay. I mean, at the time I had young kids, and if they wanted to go to Florida, I lived in New Jersey at the time. I could see why they didn't want to live there, given the prices and congestion of New Jersey. So I think that's where you sort of look at it and go, what makes sense? I think at my age now, if my wife and I were to say to my kids, hey, we're moving to California, my kids are definitely Midwest Eastern people. And I think that they would have something to say about that. I think they'd be like, okay, well, where does that leave us? So yeah, that's what I would say is the most common theme here.
I think that's interesting. And I think you bring up a really good point that there's a difference between making a move in your 60s and healthy and maybe, 10, 15 years later thinking about where's the best place for us to be. I'm going to be 67 next month, and I'm already thinking, okay, in whatever 15, 20 years, is there the possibility I will need to be closer to my daughter who lives in North Carolina? And I tend to think that way. Others may not, but it's well worth trying to build those conversations, is what I think I hear you saying.
It is. I mean, my sister and I have had a conversation with my parents. My parents are in their early 80s. They live in a relatively big home. They've been there for, gosh, 25 or 30 years. And recently we started talking about, like, hey, uh, we don't think you should leave, but we do think that we should start talking about what happens next in life as you're getting into your 80s. That's a whole nother sort of dialogue that we could go deep into, because we ended up having, a rather lengthy call talking to them about planning in life when they need support from us, and how do we make that a cooperative, loving, caring decision.
Absolutely. Yes. And I hope you'll come back and talk with us more about that. Uh,
Yes.
so going back to the positive side of this, because, basically, my husband and I graduated almost 50 years ago from high school. We still hang around a bunch of our high school friends, some of whom have downsized, some of whom have chosen not to. Um, so as you've worked with people who have either chosen to move to an area that maybe they wanted to move into or make that kind of change, what are some positive changes that you've seen after making that transition?
Yeah, so if you remember when I was talking about the end of something and the beginning of the next thing, I
Right.
think that people underestimate, they either do two things. They underestimate the positive that can come into their life because they're just still mourning the end of something, and any comparison is a loss for them, or they tend to overestimate how great it will be. They're like, finally, I've shed these burdens. And when I downsize, there will be no new burdens for me to cross. I had a good friend of mine who has moved from Ohio to North Carolina. And I remember him sharing with me when he was buying his new house, he looked at me and he said, there's no room for my drums. I'm selling my drums. And this is a guy who played drums for 50 years. And I remember the morning in it, like you could see the sadness in his face. At the same token, when I talk to him now, he is outdoors more. He is at the beach more. Like there's these things that I think we try and draw an equivalency between not playing drums and time at the beach, time playing golf, and it's hard to create that equivalency. So what I always advise my clients is the best disposition to have is to try and find somewhere in the middle, which is do not overinflate it, but also recognize that the old habits that you mourn may not be as important in your next chapter. Uh,
Mm.
and therefore, do not overweight the letting go of a drum set in exchange for playing golf 4 days a week with friends. They're not equivalent, but they both brought you joy in different ways. And frankly, I think, if he really wanted to play drums, there would be a space where he could make that work. And it is interesting to me because I feel like in some ways he had put a weight and an anchor in the selling of the drums that I found to be like not necessarily true. Do you know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Mhm.
So
Yeah.
anyway, that's how I look at that.
Do you feel like they became symbolic and that was the actual item that he chose to grieve as opposed to wow, I'm going through a big change here?
I do because it was the downsizing that meant the drums didn't make it forward. It was the acknowledgement that he was making a choice, and that in the making of the choice for a greater presumed good, this aspect of his life no longer had room. But let's be clear. I can't say I was in his house and I knew for a fact that he played drums every night. Maybe he did. My experience with these things is that they tend to be stress relievers. You go, you bang the drums, and you get all that energy out. Well, if you're not working anymore, you still can have the love of playing the drums, but the role that they play might be different. I just remember that so clearly of all of the change, moving away from his granddaughter, moving away from friends and family like me, and moving to a place in which he didn't have family. The drums was what he was like, I have to sell my drums, Jim. I was like, okay, okay. But clearly that stuck with me as a moment because I could see the sadness, if that makes sense.
No, that's perfect. And it goes so well along with the phases of retirement, which I talk about in my research and, depending upon which researcher I follow. But yeah, of course, the first stage is retiring. And
Yes,
then it's usually followed by a period of contentment called the honeymoon phase. Most people are like, woohoo, for at least some period of time. There does then often, for some people, come a period of discontent. And even though it sounds like your friend and undoubtedly a lot of people are like, I know I want to do this. I know it matters to me to change my living environment in some way. There can be an element of sadness associated with that, which hopefully rather quickly is kind of followed by sort of a rebirth, obviously reinventing retirement, an opportunity to really reinvent themselves in a way they hadn't thought of before. And your example is absolutely on target.
yeah. I don't think I've spent, listen, I'm 55, about to be 56. Retirement is somewhere in the next 5 to 10 years for me. I don't know for certain, but I've had a change in my career in which I had an opportunity to feel like what it feels like to be retired. Where I did not have a thing that said I had to be somewhere from 8 to 5 on Monday through Friday. And I still experience that in the current role that I play today. And I have spent a lot of time talking with my friends and saying, like, no, you really do need some form of a plan. It might not materialize the way you think, but you have to continue to identify a reason to get out of bed, a reason to engage with people. In that time after I left corporate America, my personal saddest day was I was probably 3 months in. It was raining. There was nothing that needed to be done. And I was just, my wife was working, my daughter was working, and I was just watching TV at 11. And, I had just this sense of like, what am I doing and why am I here? And that really drove me to have, and I continue to have sort of conversations because now, I have a schedule where I probably work 25 to 35 hours a week, and that meets my needs. But there'll be a time in which that won't be there. And I still need to feel like I'm part of something,
Yeah.
and I think when you're talking about housing and moving, there are real stats out there that say the level of happiness you are able to obtain is directly correlated to where you live.
Mhm.
Where you live, specifically how you've placed yourself in a neighborhood, in a space, and that can have such a significant impact in your later years around being fulfilled. So yeah, that's why I look at things and really question when people are like, I want to downsize, and you want to downsize here. What is it here that you see?
Yeah.
What cup is it filling?
Yeah. So is there a follow-up on the friend who gave up his drums? Has he
I mean, he
was
did. He sold his drums. He sold his house. Did it quickly. And when I talk to him, I don't hear a lot of drum wailing. For lack I see him come back to Columbus often to be with his granddaughter, and so he's making his way. But it's interesting because that gap has, I think, an emotional cost to him. I know
Mhm.
he loves his son and he loves his granddaughter passionately, Uh,
Mm.
every time he leaves, I know I can sense his like, I wish I didn't have to do this. And that is interesting. I think this is where people end up with two homes.
Yes.
Like the one near their family and the one where they want to live. And the idea of snowbird suddenly feels less luxurious and more like an emotional piece of my health.
Hmm.
The time I spend seeing my grandkids or my family or loved ones, whatever the relationship is, and the time that I am in somewhere warm in a community that welcomes me,
Yeah,
and saying, well, I'm actually going to have, there's going to be two versions of me. There's the North Carolina version and the Columbus version, uh,
exactly.
and accepting that as part of who you are, but recognizing that you're going to have this emotional switch. I
Hmm.
got 6 months, and then I'm going to emotionally have to switch into I don't have that, but I do have this.
Hmm.
And when you come back, I don't have that, but now I've got this.
Exactly.
And that's something that I think people underplay around that the effort it takes. I mean, imagine, your daughter lives in North Carolina. Imagine if you were there for 6 months and then here for 6 months. You have your patterns and your friends here that you would miss for that duration. But you also know you'd be around your daughter, around her family,
Hmm.
somewhere maybe a little warmer, right? So you might mourn for a week or two when you get down there, but then you'll pick it up and then, do you know what I'm
Yep.
saying?
Yeah, absolutely. So, do you have any advice for anyone who knows a change is coming? Maybe not right now, but they know they need to be thinking about it and they're just not emotionally ready. Any words of wisdom for them?
Yeah, I do. My advice when I meet sellers who are like, I'm interested, but I can feel that there's resistance. Like they've called me because they're curious, but they're not signing something that says put the house on the market next week. Um, my advice is to begin doing little things to move you forward, and in a preparation of the home. I love clients where I can say, listen, what is it in your house that you just haven't touched in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years? What if you don't worry about selling your home, but you just began to lighten your life of the things that are no longer serving you? What if they letting go of these things that at one point played an important part of your life, you let go of? You could begin to process those emotions in smaller chunks rather than the weight of the everything in the house. Oh, and by the way, someone like me comes in and says repaint it all, put new carpet in, and all of a sudden the house doesn't even feel like it's your house. So for me, that's always what I coach. It's good because a house that is not cluttered is easier to sell, and frankly, there is I've almost never given something to Goodwill, or sold something and turned around and went, darn it, like I wish I had those shirts back, or I wish I had that chest back, or like I, I I'm not saying people don't have those regrets. I'm just saying for me, when I am able to let go and move it out of the house, I always feel lighter. And to me, it's all about the movement of one house to another is all about coming to the point of acceptance that you're going to do it. And so there are lots of ways to take baby steps to process smaller buckets of emotion before you get to that big one.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. And that's good for people who know it's coming, but just to kind of wrap up, you've provided so much good input, so much good
You.
advice and wisdom. I can't thank you enough for this. But so if you could give one piece of advice to someone in whatever, 60s, 70s, 80s, who is just beginning to think about the next housing chapter of their life, what would it be? What would you tell them?
I think two things. I think take a realistic look at your finances.
Mm,
Take a look at your finances. When you go to find that next house, I think your next house should be a conservative thing, right? It's fine to get that reach house when you're in your 30s and 40s, and there's an arc of income that will likely go up. As you're in this phase, that income will either be flat or may go down over time. So the first thing that I always encourage is when you're looking for that next house, make sure that you spend time with an advisor or someone knowledgeable and that you model out that next house is not an aspirational purchase that leaves you in jeopardy. Because I want you to move to a place where you can go and be like, I'm going to live here for 20 years and I'm going to be good. Like economically, I'm in the right place. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing that you need to think about is your why. It's important to understand the why of where you want to go and the why you need to leave. Those two things need to come together in harmony at some point. The why of moving and the why of leaving need to essentially have a balance switch, and you need to start to figure out, like, if I look at my own life, my wife and I talk about it, but we're probably 20% move, 80% stay. And we have our reasons around where our family is in their journey that is making that balance what it is. And I think that it's something that you check in on and go, are we any closer? Has anything else changed? Now, I know as I look at the arc of my family, as my kids decide where they want to live and how they want to sort of journey into the world, those will be our natural touch points. And then lastly, going back to the point I just made, my wife and I have recently been on a kick to make sure our house is in sale ready mode. I always coach people, listen, have your house in a 90 to 95% ready to be sold at any given time. And let me explain why. The first is it means you're doing the maintenance you need to do to keep your housing costs low. If you're painting, if you're taking care of the floors, we just had a whole bunch of cement work done around the house where some things had moved. It was like $3,000 or $4,000, but that money is invested in keeping problems that at bay. The other is when you go to sell a house, recognize that if you go the as-is route, I have seen inspection reports come back with $30,000 worth of repairs. And by looking at the house and going, I don't know what I'm going to sell, but I know that I'm always, I would say 5 to 10% of the valuation of my house away from selling from a dollar perspective. That's what I generally look at. I go, take the value of a house, budget 5 to 10%, invest it now, because now you get to enjoy it. And B, it helps defer future costs that you're going to have. And that is one of the keys that I say, because that makes it, when the whys switch, they tend to switch fast. It's not like all of a sudden you're slowly going from 80 to 20. For me, I think I anticipate it will be relatively quick. My career might shift, my wife's might shift, my kids might move somewhere. And I think all of a sudden the world will go from 80-20 to 20-80. And then you're like, well, now I need to sell my house. And you ideally don't want to be on a back foot there. Does that make sense? So think about clearing out things you don't need. Think about the house maintenance that maybe you've deferred, and try and get that into the house. All of that makes the point of leaving so much less stressful. The house is more clear. The inspection report is likely going to be better. The shock of what the inspector finds, and they always find something. No one gets out of it without something. It's normal. All of that increases the likelihood that the deal closes.
Yeah.
That's really how I look at it.
That's fabulous. I can't thank you enough. You have said two such incredibly important things. And along the lines of reinventing retirement, I mean, for me, what I've taken away from this is kind of having a home base. And then whatever, for me, it's then something closer to my daughter who happens to live several states away, but also including family in on the conversation when appropriate. But more importantly, you also factor them in, whether you're talking to them or not. And those two things in particular, just kind of thinking broadly, I
Yeah.
can't thank you enough. This has been a pleasure. Is there anything else that I didn't ask you about that you wanted to be sure to tell folks?
Um, I would just say, um, try, try, and just stay in an open mindset. Um, don't romanticize the sale. Don't overdream how much you will get, but also don't catastrophize it. Um, the fact of the matter is, if you can find a good real estate agent, they will guide you through what is normal. And that's the most important thing. Can you establish the trust? So when the agent says this is a good offer, or the agent says I think there's more in the to get out of the seller, that is important. And then to your point, um, nothing here has to be permanent. So even if you do downsize and you realize this isn't for me, uh, I want people often feel trapped by their own thoughts. And so they are worried about downsizing. Great. Well, then again, try and rent an Airbnb for a month if you can. Live somewhere smaller with less stuff. How does it feel? Wherever you can experiment, do it. But also recognize if you made the leap and you moved and it just doesn't work out, you can do something else. You're not necessarily trapped.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. Jim Perry, thank you so much.
Thank
I,
you.
I appreciate it. And for more information, tips and tricks on having, reinventing your retirement, please join me at youtube.com/at reinventing-retirement. And I look forward to seeing everyone again soon. Thanks so much.
Take care.